Well, Mr. Speaker, I never quite realised that Chris was so uncertain about his sexuality that he was constantly being challenged every time he saw any sort of sexualised ad or softcore pornography in a newsagent. I'm going to deal with a couple of issues in this speech. Firstly, however, I've got one piece of outstanding rebuttal that doesn't fit into my themes, which is on the idea of whether or not the state or corporations have a better incentive in terms of how they regulate sexuality. What Chris told you is that corporate incentives mean that those corporations are going to have totally perverse incentives in the way that they deal with sexuality. We think that is absolutely false, and he never told you why the state has a better incentive, because what he said was that corporations are going to make this far more perverse. They're going to make people feel uncomfortable. But that was curious when he also went on to say that these corporations want to appeal to the largest amount of market share. They want people to be comfortable in buying their products. We think that by his own analysis, corporations don't have an incentive to actually make a large portion of their market feel uncomfortable. That's precisely why we see a lot of sexualized magazines doing things like wrapping their magazines in cling film so that when you go into a newsagent, people don't have to be confronted by that. Secondly, Chris's analysis on this was that corporations, when they produce sexualized ads, have an incentive to reduce that sexuality down to its rawest form. We think that's a good thing, because what that means is it actually allows people to put on their personal interpretation of sexuality onto that raw form that the ad shows. It allows people to interpret those ads in the widest way that is most personal to them. So we think that by his own analysis, the idea that corporations will always respond worse to sexuality in regulating it fell down in this debate. My first point of substantive, which is also going to respond to a lot of Chris's material, is about what this motion or this proposal says about the way we deal with sexuality. Because what these guys want to do is remove it from public life. Interestingly, Chris started his speech by acknowledging that we are all influenced by the sexual manifestations that exist in public life. Ergo, by removing it, we think they remove a large portion of the way we construct our sexual identity, which we think is a problem in this debate. What does this proposal say about sexuality? It says that it is dangerous, something that needs to be repressed, something that is similar to illicit substances, Mr. Speaker, and needs to be regulated to that extent. We're not really quite sure, utterly, what they wanted to talk about in regards to sexualized images, so I'm going to break these two things down. Firstly, if we're talking about sexualized ads, we think that what this says is that people are unduly influenced by sexuality, that they're somehow coerced by sexualized ads, because they can't respond to them in a rational way, in the same way they would respond to any other sort of advertising. We think that's harmful when you say that people can't respond rationally to sexualization. If we're talking about softcore porn being available in newsagents, we think that that's problematic, because again it suggests that people can't, by the existence of sexuality just being around them, that their own sense of their own sexuality and their own sexual identity are fundamentally confronted by that. We don't think that people's identities are as unstable as the opening opposition wanted to have you believe. But finally, what we've heard from Chris on this issue is that no, we need to limit this because you can totally express your sexuality in private. We think that that's wrong for a couple of reasons. Firstly, on the idea of religion, we think that we could, probably limit religious expression to the private sphere, but we don't do that for a number of reasons. Firstly, because when you limit expression of identity to the private sphere, it involves some sort of shame. It says that not everyone is happy with you doing that. Not everyone is happy with you expressing your sexuality in that way. We think that it is unfair to force that shame on people who just want to have some aspects of public life sexualized and express sexual identity in, for instance, their consumption or in their reading magazines. But secondly, we think that your public sexuality is very different to your private sexuality. That you can choose to have sexuality involved in your personality and your outward identity in a way that is very different to sexuality as it would manifest within your own intimate relationships. I'll take you now, Jen.
Isn't the problem that people's perceptions of sexuality within dominant media can affect me, even if that's not the way in which I want to perceive my own sexuality? So I'm being treated like an object in the bedroom because that's how man sees me in public.
Well, firstly, we don't think you're banning porn altogether, so I think you're going to have a fast stretch to prove that all porn is not going to continue to demean women. But I'm going to talk now now in my second point of substantive about why offence is not a legitimate way of regulating this. Given that I proved to you that there is some value in having sexuality in the public sphere, why isn't it enough that just some people, like Jen, are offended by this and we shouldn't regulate it on that basis? We think in a liberal society that you have to have a number of identities existing in public life. For instance, sexual libertines, like we're talking about in this debate, may also oppose the public expression of religion. If I'm an atheist and people publicly proclaim their religion, we think to the same extent I could be offended by that. But the fact is that we don't regulate those things. We also don't regulate political views that may also be offensive. Why don't we do that? Firstly, because we don't force people to feel shameful about aspects of their public identity. Secondly, we don't think that we should tell people who are offended by these things that they have to be so offended that by the existence of countervailing views in society that their identity is fundamentally shaken to the core, that they can't respond to those identity challenges. That is to say that these guys would tell you that women can't get up and respond to the fact that some sorts of sexualization demean them, that women can't answer those challenges. We think that harms their own sense of identity when you say to them it's not stable enough that when someone just has a countervailing view, you can no longer attach that identity to yourself. Thirdly, we don't think that we limit those countervailing identity influences because to some extent we want the public sphere to allow for alternative conceptions of sexuality. So let's talk about teenagers from a very conservative family. We want those teenagers to have challenging interpretations of people being able to be sexually liberalised in the public sphere. We think that's a very important function of the public sphere, is that you can experience other forms of identity, that you're not only just limited to your own identity, because we think it is good for people to be able to challenge their sexual values, to explore their sexuality. And indeed that conversation, when we do think your sexuality will be challenged, for instance, when you develop as a teenager, or when you just come across this material because you're not going to be able to totally insulate yourself. It's not like just because it's isolated to XXX, XXX, that you're never going to come across an internet site that has sexualization. We think that conversation is harder when the public sphere hasn't already shown you that there is some alternative. When you allow people to exist in a bubble, that makes those identity challenges harder for them. We think that this motion should fall, Mr. Speaker, for the following reasons. Firstly, sexuality is important to people. It's important as a public manifestation of their identity. But even if it wasn't true that was the case, we don't think that offence with this is good enough. People's identities are more stable. They can be challenged by the alternative conceptions that we would allow in this debate. That's why the motion should fall.